Today's video, The Invisible Architects, an introduction to media's influence. From the printed broadsheets of centuries past to the digital streams that flow into our lives today, media has always been more than a simple mirror of reality. It is a powerful force, capable of constructing our understanding of the world, shaping our beliefs, and guiding our actions. This documentary, Manufactured Realities, embarks on an investigative journey into the documented history of how mass media has been used to influence public opinion. We will explore how the tools of communication in the hands of governments, corporations, and individuals have been strategically employed to build narratives, direct sentiment, and manufacture consent. Our exploration is not one of fantasy or conspiracy, but a calm, scholarly examination of historical records. Our approach is strictly evidence-first. Every claim presented is rooted in verifiable sources, academic research, and meticulously preserved archival materials. We are navigating through pivotal moments where the line between information and persuasion became intentionally blurred. The visual landscape of this journey will consist entirely of authentic historical artifacts. You will see the coarse texture of 19th century newspapers, the stark imagery of wartime propaganda posters, and the flickering glow of early television broadcasts, all chosen to directly correspond with the documented events being discussed. The auditory experience is designed to complement this investigative tone. A mellow, relaxing symphonic melody, featuring soft strings and subtle percussion, will provide a contemplative background. This music will be interwoven with light atmospheric sounds, the gentle static of a vintage radio, the ambient hum of a bustling newsroom, or the rhythmic clatter of typewriters. These elements work in concert to transport you back in time, creating an immersive yet scholarly atmosphere. We believe that by understanding the mechanics of past manipulation, we can better equip ourselves to navigate the complex media environment of the present with clarity and critical awareness. This documentary is structured as a series of documented case studies. We are beginning with the foundations of influence, examining the rise of mass printing and the era of yellow journalism. From there, we are delving into the psychology of persuasion, introducing pioneers like Edward Bernays, who transformed advertising into a science. Subsequent segments will analyze the impact of radio, the strategic use of propaganda in global conflicts, the persuasive power of television, and finally, the intricate challenges posed by the digital age. Our journey is about understanding the documented past to better comprehend the present and safeguard the future. Our investigation begins by tracing the origins of mass influence to the Industrial Revolution, the steam-powered printing press, and the birth of the modern newspaper. We will uncover how yellow journalism used sensationalism to serve the ambitions of media barons like William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. Used sensationalism not just to sell papers, but to sway public opinion on matters as significant as war. The journey then moves into the early 20th century to explore the dawn of psychological warfare in public relations. We will introduce Edward Bernays, a pivotal figure who applied the theories of his uncle, Sigmund Freud, to craft campaigns that profoundly altered public behavior and consumption habits. From popularizing smoking among women to shaping wartime messaging. Next, we tune into the radio age, focusing on the night of October 30th, 1938. Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast became a case study in the power of a trusted medium to create belief. We will examine the event through the lens of historical records and the subsequent, often exaggerated, newspaper coverage that cemented its place in media history. The documentary then pivots to the immense propaganda machines of World War I and World War II, analyzing how governments used posters, films, and radio broadcasts to unify nations, demonize enemies, and sustain morale on the home front. As technology evolved, so did the methods of persuasion. Our historical path leads us to the mid-20th century and the rise of television, a medium that brought visual storytelling directly into the living room. We will look at documented instances of televised political debates and advertisements that began to shape voter perception and public trust in ways print and radio never could. From there, we transition into our current digital era. This segment will present verified studies on algorithmic amplification, the formation of echo chambers, and the rapid spread of misinformation across social media platforms, grounding the discussion in peer-reviewed research and documented real-world examples. Finally, this documentary will conclude, not with a sense of despair, but with a call for awareness and empowerment. By summarizing the key lessons from our historical journey, we will emphasize the importance of media literacy in the 21st century. The techniques of influence may adapt to new technologies, but their fundamental principles often remain the same. This film is designed to avoid speculation and sensationalism, adhering strictly to a factual narrative. Our closing reflection will focus on the vital role of critical thinking and the pursuit of verified information, leaving you with the understanding that as media evolves, so must our ability to see the truth clearly. The story of media manipulation begins not with a broadcast or a digital algorithm, but with paper and ink. The 19th century witnessed a technological revolution that transformed the newspaper from a modest broadsheet for the elite into a powerful engine of mass communication. Innovations like the steam-powered rotary printing press, developed by Richard Hoe in the 1840s, dramatically increased the speed and scale of production. Suddenly, tens of thousands of copies could be printed in a single hour. This technological leap, combined with the falling cost of paper and rising literacy rates, laid the groundwork for a new kind of media empire. This new industrial scale fundamentally altered the economics of the newspaper business. The primary goal shifted from serving a small, educated subscriber base to capturing the attention of the burgeoning urban working class. Circulation became the ultimate measure of success, as higher readership numbers translated directly into more lucrative advertising revenue. Commercial pressure created a fierce, competitive environment. The content began to change, moving away from dense political discourse towards stories that were more immediate, more sensational, and more emotionally resonant. The newspaper was no longer just a record of events. It was becoming a product designed for mass consumption and appeal. The visual and textual language of the newspaper also evolved to meet this new demand. Large, bold headlines were introduced to grab attention from street corner newsstands. Woodcut illustrations and eventually, photographs were added. These images were not merely decorative. They were powerful tools for storytelling, capable of conveying emotion, creating heroes, and creating villains, and simplifying complex issues into easily digestible narratives. This shift marked a critical turning point. The medium was learning to prioritize impact over nuance. As newspapers grew in influence, they began to assume a central role in the daily lives of millions. They were the primary source of information about local, national, and international affairs, shaping how ordinary people understood their world and their place within it. This newfound power was not lost on the ambitious publishers who commanded these media enterprises. They recognized that by controlling the flow of information, they could do more than just report the news. They could actively shape public perception, set political agendas, and mobilize popular sentiment. The press was becoming an institution capable of wielding immense influence, an invisible architect of public thought. In the final decades of the 19th century, intense competition for readership culminated in a style of reporting that would be forever known as yellow journalism. This term, derived from the yellow ink used to print a popular comic strip called The Yellow Kid, came to symbolize a brand of news that valued sensationalism above all else. At the heart of this movement were two towering figures of American media: Joseph Pulitzer, publisher of the New York World, and William Randolph Hearst, his challenger and proprietor of the New York Journal. Their rivalry transformed the media landscape of New York City and, by extension, the entire nation into a battlefield for circulation. The tactics of yellow journalism were clear and effective. They included the use of multi-column, banner headlines that screamed for attention, a lavish and often exaggerated use of pictures and illustrations, and a reliance on anonymous sources and pseudo-scientific experts to lend a veneer of authority to speculative stories. The content itself focused on crime, scandal, tragedy, and human interest stories, often embellished for dramatic effect. Pulitzer and Hearst understood that fear, outrage, and sympathy were powerful drivers of sales. Their papers crafted compelling, emotional narratives that were designed to bypass rational thought and appeal directly to the reader's gut instincts, turning the daily news into a form of dramatic entertainment. This era was defined by a departure from the standards of objective reporting. Accuracy became secondary to creating a compelling story that would sell more copies than the competition. Reporters were encouraged to become part of the stories they were covering, to stage events, and to present their narratives with a clear moral bias. For example, Hearst's Journal famously sent reporter and illustrator Frederick Remington to Cuba to cover the tensions with Spain. When Remington cabled that there was no war to cover, Hearst's legendary, though likely apocryphal reply was, "You furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war." This sentiment perfectly captured the ethos of yellow journalism. The press was not just a reporter of reality, but an active participant in its creation. The most significant and well-documented case of yellow journalism's influence is its role in fomenting public support for the Spanish-American War in 1898. For years leading up to the conflict, William Randolph Hearst's and Joseph Pulitzer's newspapers published lurid and highly exaggerated accounts of Spanish atrocities in Cuba. They painted a stark picture of heroic Cuban rebels fighting for freedom against a brutal and tyrannical Spanish regime. Stories of starvation, torture, and oppression, accompanied by dramatic illustrations showing Spanish officials as monstrous villains and Cuban women as helpless victims, created a powerful narrative demanding American intervention. The pivotal moment came on February 15, 1898. The battleship Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, killing 266 American sailors. Before any official investigation, the Yellow Press immediately blamed Spain. Hearst's New York Journal ran the headline, "Destruction of the Warship." Maine was the work of an enemy. It even offered a $50,000 reward for evidence. "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," became a national rallying cry, fueled by the Yellow Press. Political pressure on President William McKinley became immense. Historians debate whether the press was the single cause, but documented evidence shows Hearst and Pulitzer's media environment made peaceful resolution politically untenable. A 1976 investigation by Admiral Hyman G. Rickover concluded the Maine explosion was likely an internal accident, a coal bunker fire igniting an adjacent ammunition magazine. Yet the truth came far too late. The reality had been manufactured decades earlier in New York City press rooms. The Spanish-American War became the first major conflict where mass media played a documented role in shaping public will, setting a precedent for the century that followed. As the age of sensational headlines matured, a new, more subtle form of influence was taking shape, moving beyond simple exaggeration and into the complex terrain of human psychology. Its chief architect was Edward Louis Bernays. Born in Vienna in 1891 and the nephew of the pioneering psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud, Bernays possessed a unique insight into the hidden forces that drive human behavior. He understood that people were often guided not by rational thought, but by unconscious desires, primal emotions, and the powerful influence of group identity. He did not see himself as a mere press agent, coining the term public relations counsel to describe his profession. He sought to elevate his work into a professional discipline, one grounded in the emerging social sciences of psychology and sociology. His goal was not simply to sell a product, but to engineer public perception on a mass scale, to create the very circumstances that would make his clients' goals seem like the public's own idea. In his seminal 1928 book, titled simply Propaganda, Bernays laid out his theories with unnerving clarity. He argued that the manipulation of public opinion was a necessary component of a functioning, democratic society. He believed an invisible government of intelligent individuals was required to sift through information and present it to the masses in a way that would ensure social control. This engineering of consent, as he called it, was the primary task of the Public Relations Council. He detailed methods for using third-party authorities, such as doctors or scientists, to validate a client's claims. One of his documented campaigns involved boosting the sales of bacon for the Beechnut Packing Company. Instead of simple advertisements, Bernays took a more scientific route. He surveyed physicians, asking them whether they agreed that a hearty breakfast was more beneficial than a light one. When they overwhelmingly agreed, he sent the results to thousands of newspapers nationwide. The articles and the bacon ads that followed implicitly linked eating bacon and eggs to the medical establishment's advice, and sales soared. The public believed they were making a healthy choice, not responding to a PR campaign. Arguably, the most famous and well-documented example of Bernays' methodology was his Torches of Freedom campaign for the American Tobacco Company in 1929. At the time, there was a strong social taboo against women smoking in public. The company hired Bernays to break this taboo. Instead of a crude ad campaign, Bernays devised a plan to link cigarette smoking with the burgeoning feminist movement. His strategy was to reframe the act of smoking as a symbol of female empowerment. He consulted a psychoanalyst who confirmed cigarettes could be seen as challenging male power. Bernays seized on this and coined the phrase, "Torches of Freedom." He hired a large group of fashionable young women to march in New York's popular Easter Sunday parade. At a pre-arranged signal, the women dramatically lit up their torches of freedom. Bernays had already alerted the press. The story was a sensation. Newspapers across the country ran photographs of the stylish women smoking, framing the act as a bold step toward gender equality. The image of a woman smoking in public was instantly transformed from one of shame into one of glamorous, modern rebellion. The social barrier was broken, and cigarette sales to women began to climb steadily. The Torches of Freedom event was a perfect case study of Bernays' principles. It stands as a stark, documented example of how public relations could manufacture a new social reality. By the 1930s, a new voice had entered the American home, one that would redefine the speed and intimacy of mass communication. Radio, once a novelty, had blossomed into the nation's dominant medium. Unlike the printed page, it required no literacy and delivered information with unparalleled immediacy, speaking directly to millions in their living rooms. Families would gather around the glowing dial of their sets each evening, listening to a shared national conversation of news, music, and dramatic programming. This daily ritual fostered a deep and unprecedented sense of trust in the medium. The voices that came through the speaker were perceived as authoritative and truthful. News bulletins, delivered by announcers with somber, measured tones, brought updates on the growing tensions in Europe and the struggles of the Great Depression. Alongside news, radio drama reached a golden age. Sound effects engineers became masters of illusion, creating entire worlds with simple tools. These audio landscapes were incredibly immersive, inviting listeners to actively participate in the creation of the story by filling in the visual details with their own imaginations. It was within this specific context, a nation anxious about global conflict and a deep, ingrained trust in a powerful new medium, that the events of October 30th, 1938, would unfold. On the evening of Sunday, October 30th, 1938, just one day before Halloween, a competing program to the popular Chase and Sanborn Hour began, the Mercury Theater on the Air. This prestigious dramatic series was the creation of the 23-year-old prodigy Orson Welles and his collaborator John Houseman. That night's performance was an adaptation of H.G. Wells's classic novel, The War of the Worlds, updated to a contemporary American setting. The program began with a standard introduction, but a significant portion of the audience tuned in late. What they heard instead was the soothing music of Ramon Raquello and his orchestra. Suddenly, the music was interrupted by a news bulletin. An announcer reported strange explosions of incandescent gas observed on the surface of the planet Mars. The broadcast masterfully escalated the tension, with on-the-scene reports. A reporter at a farm in Grover's Mill, New Jersey, described a mysterious cylindrical object that had fallen from the sky. The narrative unfolded through simulated live interviews. The fictional narrative reached its terrifying climax as the reporter described giant tripods unleashing a deadly heat ray, his broadcast cutting out mid-scream. For those who had missed the introduction, there was little to distinguish it from an actual catastrophic event. In the immediate aftermath, a narrative of nationwide mass panic took hold, a story largely crafted and amplified by the newspaper industry. which seized the opportunity to portray their rival radio as irresponsible. However, subsequent academic research paints a more nuanced picture. Historians have presented compelling evidence that the scale of the panic was significantly exaggerated by the press. The story of the War of the Worlds, Panic is, therefore, a story about media shaping the perception of a media event. The newspapers created the legend by focusing on anecdotal evidence. The research that followed, most notably Hadley Cantrell's study, The Invasion from Mars, also contributed to the myth by focusing its analysis on those who did panic. Ultimately, the broadcast became a landmark case study. It revealed a public vulnerability to a new style of immersive broadcasting, while the newspaper coverage that followed showed how that event could be mythologized into a permanent lesson on the power of media. When the First World War erupted in 1914, it was not only a conflict fought with new weapons on the battlefield, but also a war waged for the hearts and minds of civilians at home. Governments on all sides recognized that modern warfare required the total mobilization of their populations, sustaining public morale and encouraging civilians to buy war bonds and conserve resources. To achieve this, nations established official propaganda agencies, tasked with systematically shaping public opinion. These agencies employed talented writers and artists to craft a unified national narrative, simplifying the complex causes of the war into a clear, moralistic struggle between good and evil. For the Allied powers, the war was a crusade for civilization against the barbaric Hun. For the Central Powers, it was a defensive war to protect their fatherland. In the United States, the Committee on Public Information, led by George Creel, launched a comprehensive campaign. The committee recruited 75,000 volunteers known as the 4-Minute Men, who were trained to deliver short, patriotic, pro-war speeches in public venues like movie theaters during the 4 minutes it took to change a film reel. This coordinated effort demonstrated the immense power of centralized propaganda. It successfully spurred recruitment and raised billions through Liberty Bond drives. However, it also had a darker, documented side. The CPI's relentless campaign fostered an atmosphere of intense suspicion and intolerance toward dissent. German Americans faced persecution, and anti-war activists were imprisoned. While speeches and newspaper articles were important, it was the propaganda poster that delivered the most potent emotional appeal. They used powerful, archetypal imagery and concise, commanding slogans to bypass rational thought and trigger immediate emotional responses. Patriotism, guilt, fear, and hatred. Britain's iconic Lord Kitchener poster was a masterpiece of direct address, singling out every man who saw it. Then, American Uncle Sam poster became one of the most enduring images in U.S. history. Evenly important was the task of dehumanizing the enemy. Allied propaganda, in particular, excelled at this. American posters depicted the German soldier as a monstrous, ape-like Hun. This imagery transformed a national enemy into a barbaric monster that had to be destroyed. The documented effect was profound. The posters were highly effective, but this relentless campaign of visual hatred helped solidify national stereotypes and fostered a climate where brutality could be justified. When the world plunged into conflict again in 1939, the techniques of propaganda were refined and deployed on an even grander scale. World War II became a total war, not only in a military sense, but in a media sense as well. In the United States, the government established the Office of War Information in 1942. Learning from the heavy-handedness of the CPI, the WWII sought to integrate its messages more seamlessly into popular culture, working closely with Hollywood. It worked with studios to produce films like Mrs. Miniver, which depicted the resilience of a British family and was accredited by Winston Churchill as being worth more than a flotilla of destroyers. Famous film directors like Frank Capra were recruited. Capra's 7-part Why We Fight series captured enemy footage and powerful narration to explain the causes of the war and justify America's involvement. This total media offensive was unbelievably successful. Posters encouraged women to join the workforce with the iconic image of Rosie the Riveter, transforming the social roles to meet wartime needs. While the propaganda of World War II was often more subtle than its predecessor, its pervasiveness made it arguably even more powerful. It demonstrated that a government could orchestrate a symphony of influence to construct a national reality so compelling it would mobilize millions. The mid-20th century heralded the arrival of television, bringing moving images into the intimacy of the American home and creating a shared visual experience on a scale never before seen. Television transformed the political landscape. It shifted emphasis from policy to image, charisma, and perceived trustworthiness. The politician was now a living room candidate under nightly scrutiny. The first widely documented instance was the 1960 Nixon-Kennedy debate. Radio listeners generally thought Nixon won. Television viewers saw Kennedy as young and confident, while Nixon appeared pale and sweating. The debate became a foundational case study. Studies suggested TV was a decisive factor. Nonverbal cues, posture, appearance, confidence, could outweigh verbal arguments. Televised political advertising evolved. The 1964 Daisy ad, a girl counting petals, a missile countdown, a nuclear blast, aired once and linked candidate Barry Goldwater to nuclear threat, proving television could define a candidate with symbolic imagery. Beyond elections, television's daily news broadcasts began to exert a profound influence on public understanding. The medium's visual nature meant editorial choices became powerful acts of framing. The Vietnam War is perhaps the most extensively documented example. For the first time, the brutal realities of combat were broadcast into American living rooms night after night, creating what became known as the Living Room War. The 1968 Tet Offensive was a critical turning point. Though a military failure for North Vietnam, the televised images of fighters attacking the U.S. Embassy in Saigon directly contradicted optimistic reports from leaders. The visual evidence of chaos on screen was more powerful than official pronouncements of progress, creating a credibility gap that eroded public trust. The power of a single image was repeatedly demonstrated. The image of a South Vietnamese general executing a prisoner and the photo of a naked girl fleeing a napalm attack had a visceral and lasting impact. These images became powerful symbols that humanized the victims and brought the brutal consequences of policy decisions into sharp focus, fueling the anti-war movement. The visual frame selected by news producers, whether focusing on peaceful marchers or violent clashes, could define a movement in the public mind. Television was not a passive window. It was an active participant, selecting, framing, and constructing a specific visual reality. The transition from the broadcast era to the digital age marked a paradigm shift. Where television offered a limited number of channels, the digital era fractured this landscape into a near infinite number of sources. The new gatekeepers were no longer human editors, but complex, opaque algorithms designed to maximize user engagement. This algorithmic curation creates a phenomenon documented by numerous studies: the filter bubble, or echo chamber. Platforms are engineered to show us more of what we already like and agree with. Research from institutions like MIT has demonstrated that content that is novel and evokes strong emotions, particularly outrage, anger, and fear, spreads significantly faster and wider than more neutral factual information. This creates a systemic bias in favor of sensationalism. In the digital era, algorithms can create highly personalized, divergent realities for different users, making it difficult to have a common societal conversation. The architecture of the digital era created fertile ground for rapid, wide-scale misinformation. Unlike the centralized propaganda of the past, modern misinformation is decentralized, user-generated, and designed to look authentic. Verified case studies document coordinated campaigns by state actors using armies of fake accounts or bots to artificially amplify certain narratives and sow social division. A 2018 study in Science analyzed years of Twitter data and found false news reached more people, penetrated deeper into social networks, and spread significantly faster than true stories. The rise of deepfakes and synthetic media is a new and alarming frontier. These AI-generated videos can show people saying or doing things they never did. Seeing is no longer believing. The digital era has democratized the tools of mass persuasion. That places a greater burden on individual users to develop media literacy, critical thinking, and source verification to navigate an increasingly polluted information environment. Our journey through the documented history of media influence reveals a powerful truth. While the technologies of communication are in constant flux, the fundamental techniques of persuasion remain remarkably consistent. From the sensational headlines of the Yellow Press to the psychological operations of Bernays, a core set of methods has been reused and refined. Each case study reinforces the central lesson: the gatekeepers of information hold immense power to define our world. This historical perspective is not meant to inspire cynicism, but to foster a healthy and necessary skepticism. It pulls back the curtain on the mechanics of influence, allowing us to see the strings that have long been used to direct the public mind. By recognizing the patterns of the past, we are better equipped to identify them in the present. Today, we stand at the most complex juncture in this long history. The algorithmic architects of our social media feeds have inadvertently built the most efficient misinformation delivery systems in human history. The sensationalism of yellow journalism finds its modern echo in clickbait headlines. The psychological tactics of Bernays are now supercharged by data analytics. We are each living in our own manufactured reality, curated by invisible forces to keep us watching, clicking, and scrolling. This new reality places a profound burden on the individual. The mandate for the 21st century citizen is to develop a robust and vigilant sense of media literacy. We must become our own fact-checkers, our own editors, and our own curators. The history of media manipulation is, at its core, a history of the struggle for the human mind. The path forward must be one of intellectual empowerment. The most effective defense is the widespread cultivation of critical thinking. We must learn to approach the information we consume with a set of fundamental questions. Who created this message? And what is their purpose? What techniques are they using to make it credible and persuasive? We must learn to cross-reference. If a shocking claim appears, actively search for other independent sources. A lack of corroboration is a significant red flag. Ultimately, the story of manufactured realities is not a conclusion, but a continuing dialogue between the medium and the mind. As media evolves, so does its power. But this power is not absolute. By understanding its documented history, by being aware of its modern mechanics, and by arming ourselves with the tools of critical thought, we can learn to better navigate its influence. It is through this conscious effort that we can move closer to a clearer vision of the truth. Understanding the history of media manipulation is the first step toward writing a different future for ourselves. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.